Hello and welcome. It's exactly 12 noon Eastern Time. My name is Mike Blinder. I am the publisher of E&P Magazine. I want to welcome you to the sixth of one of our partner webinars. And today's topic, obviously, if you're just coming in, is about public notices. But before we get there, I'd love to do a little housekeeping with you. First of all, we are using a platform I'm sure you've heard all about called Zoom. And we are not on Zoom Meeting. Odds are you've been using that in business or what have you. We're in a platform called Zoom Webinar, which kind of means I'm controlling everything right now. You cannot speak because we have over 150 registered for today's workshop. It would be kind of odd to have that many people talking at the same time. And you have two choices at the bottom of your screen to communicate. One is chat, one is raise hand, three, and one is Q&A. Guess what? We're only going to look at chat today. So I ask you to use that for any dialogue you want to have. Speak to our panelists today, make a comment to the group, agree, disagree, ask for more information, what have you. But I urge you to make your comment more public. In other words, when you go to the chat box, the first thing it defaults to is this icon, panelist. And that means only us on the panel will see your comment. Let's be a little bit more open, shall we? Let's do this. Make sure when you make a comment, you're making it to panelists and attendees. And that way we can all join in and be part of today's workshop. So let's get to work now. Let's bring in all our panelists. I think we're all here, are we not? I have Francis Wick, the CEO of Wick Communications. Francis, I hope you're active. You're on the West Coast. You got up early for us, so thank you very much, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
All right, Cameron Nutting-Williams. Cameron, you and I know each other. You're the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer of Ogden Newspapers. Cameron, a pleasure. And also, I've got to say this, you are one of E&P's 25 under 35 this year. We know that will get you through all the special rope lines now when you go to clubs in New York City. Am I correct?
I think that's right. Thanks, Mike.
It's my pleasure. Stefani Beard. Stefani, you and I have not met face-to-face, I believe, but you are a legals team manager for McClatchy. What city do you join us from?
I am in Oklahoma City.
Oh, that's a great place. So you still have rope lines, I'm sure, in your big clubs there as well. But and I understand are you a stand-up comic as well, Stefani?
I try my best to be funny. So yeah.
All right, good. And then of course, Jake Seaton, who's always with us. Jake is the founder and CEO of Column, the company that's sponsoring today's workshop. Jake, it's an honor to have you here as well. So with all that being said, let's get to work here. We're going to make this more of a dialogue and a conversation if I can. And with your permission, I'd like to start with you, Francis. Tell us a little bit more about Wick Communications. You and I go way back. I'm very familiar with your company, but some people may not. The size, the scope, how centralized are you, Francis?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So Wick Communications is a small third-generation family-run newspaper company based out of southeastern Arizona, a small town called Sierra Vista. We're along the international border here. And we operate about 20 markets in 11 states and very rural, sub 100,000 population markets, predominantly in the West. We have about 325 full-time equivalents.
You have a paper I actually visited way up in Alaska. Is that correct, sir? You are in.
That is correct.
Yeah, you sent,
yes.
and it's not Anchorage. It's you have a specialty product in Anchorage. It's where Wasilla. Do I have that right? Is that where you?
Yeah. So we have two publications. We have a few publications, but the markets we serve are Anchorage and Wasilla, and the Anchorage product is more of an alternative publication.
What is your biggest market at Wick Communications, if I could ask?
It's Wenatchee, Washington. So Central Washington. It's an operation that we assumed about 3 years ago from the Woods family. Our values aligned. There was a lot of similarities between the history of our families, and we were able to carry on that mantle for them.
I visited there 7 years ago for the Woods, and it's the Apple capital of the world, I believe.
That's
I
right.
don't know why I threw that in. Francis, thank you so much. Cameron, another family operation, Ogden Newspapers. You're part of a multi-generational family. Am I correct, Cameron?
Yeah, I'm a member of the 5th generation. So we are, family owned and operated, small company. We are based out of Wheeling, West Virginia. We have about 50 markets. We've actually, expanded quite a bit just in the last few years. So, we've expanded the footprint, operating in 16 states now. And but still really community newspapers, very locally focused, local newsrooms and fairly decentralized. So we're in the process of, doing some clustering and some hubbing, which we'll talk about later, but really still some very independent and local community papers.
I guess the antithesis of that or the opposite would be McClatchy, a very centralized company. Stephanie, that's where you come in. You actually are in charge of all legals for the entire company. And correct me if I'm wrong, you work in a large call center environment. Is that correct, Stephanie?
Yes, that is correct. We have about 28 different markets. All of those have dailies, and then they all have several weeklies.
And you handled just legals, or, I mean, the call center must handle multiple products, but you're just in charge of that one vertical, which are the legals.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Your history, I'm curious, how did you become head of legals for McClatchy?
So I actually started with the sales team at McClatchy and just kind of really caught on with the legals team and worked my way up. And then when we centralized everything is when I became the director of all of the legals.
Okay, that's great. Now let's get into the actual topic for today, which are public notices or the public notice segment. So let me swing back to Francis. How important is this business to you? How you've been tracking it? How has Wick handled the public notice business in the various markets you serve, Francis?
Yeah, public notice is a very meaningful part of our revenue stream. It has been for a long time. It's also a very meaningful part of the operation and providing information independently of the government. And so that's something that we've traditionally been very engaged with our state associations around, and making sure that that is an independent source of information for the community to consume. And it is something that we've seen, quite frankly, get smaller and smaller over time. That revenue stream, as we've seen some legislation come out that has carved out certain types of notices from being required. But at the end of the day, it's still a very impactful part of our business.
Well, the reason I wanted to start with you is your markets are so varied. That's why I brought up Wasilla, and then you're in. I mean, I've traveled to all the Wick markets when I was working for you guys years ago doing some consulting, and it's a crazy environment. Every place is different. You even have an oil market right up in the Dakotas that crosses over into Idaho, if I'm correct. And it's just various different ways that this public notice business is garnered. So let me bring in Jake. Jake, you are, you live and breathe newspapers, because first of all, before we get into the company you started, you're in a family, multi-generational family as well, correct, Jake, with newspapers out of Kansas?
Yeah, so I'm the fifth generation of the Seaton family to be in the newspaper business. We purchased the Manhattan Mercury, which was our flagship, back in 1915. And since then have kind of expanded throughout the American Midwest and have about 10 markets that are around 50,000 or so population in Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and Colorado.
All right, so again, this is a fascinating story, because I actually read your story and why you found column. And I don't want to make this the Jake Seaton, story, although I think for an hour it'd be fascinating. I urge everyone to go to the column website and read it. You were young, you were in the company, you went to Harvard, correct? I mean, and then while you were there, you watched the industry start to hurt. So you dropped out for a little while and wanted to get back into the company and help the family. And you embedded yourself in the public notice area of your business. Is that correct? To learn how these public notices came in?
Yeah, so growing up, I kind of watched my dad wrestle with the challenges of running a newspaper business during the rise of the internet. And when I got to college, chose to study computer science because I figured that was going to be the way to develop the skills I would need to help my family's business survive. And really fell in love with this public notice issue, which is such an important revenue stream, an increasingly large proportion of the publisher's overall business. As a problem that I really figured that I could make a dent in, not just for my family's company, but for the industry as a whole. And so that was kind of the original inspiration behind what has become Column, which started by me just talking to a bunch of our customers and trying to understand their experience and see if we can put some technology to use.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Every single city, every single hamlet, every single state has a different policy on why and how these things have to be generated. I mean, it's an automatic business in some cases. If I'm legally going to change my name in some cities, towns, states, I've got to tell the world about it. When I formed my LLC years ago, I had to tell the world about it. But it's all done differently. Am I correct? It's not just one central system, and every hamlet, and every town in every state has different requirements. Am I correct?
Yeah, all 50 states have different laws that define what a newspaper of record means, what kind of schedule notices have to be published on, what kind of documentation is required, what kind of pricing publishers are allowed to charge. And so for some, as a lot of the industry has kind of been consolidating a little bit, I think it becomes a more and more difficult challenge for some of these enterprise publishers to, stay in compliance and abreast of all of those different requirements across different markets. And so I think I saw an opportunity there to build some technology that would help with that problem when you're talking about the scale of McClatchy or Ogden or Wick.
Well, Stefani, you're sitting in charge of the legal business. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the end customer varies from a bureaucrat in a city to a human being like me that started an LSC and was told you got to put a notice somewhere. I mean, it's all shapes, sizes, and product knowledge. Am I correct, Stefani?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. You have someone who's super familiar with the process, and then you've got those one-off customers like you who are changing their name or filing for divorce.
Right.
And yeah, they are not as familiar with the process.
And the process varies. What happens if I want to place a public notice at 9 p.m. because I'm finally done with the day, but the newspaper's closed and Gladys, who's working the phone, ain't there? Am I right? This is one of you lose that business.
Yep.
Now, Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong, but the definition of what newspapers these notices can go in vary from market to market that you're in, right? There's the dailies, there's the weeklies. What's a daily? What's a weekly? What's a newspaper? Cameron, so it's all over the place?
Yeah, I mean, it varies enormously. And I think it's been very personal to us as a company to take these regulations seriously. And I think as an industry, we have followed and tracked it because we feel like it's an important part of our responsibility to be finding this information, getting this information out to the public, working with our customers to make sure everything is filed correctly, to make sure we follow all the rules. And so it's been a very personal business for us as we've, dealt with it in every market. And yeah, it's different everywhere. And we have worked really hard in virtually all of our markets to be compliant, to qualify as the newspaper of record and that's a position that, is very important to us and very important to a lot of newspapers, that we're able to keep that position in the market and that position of prominence in the community too.
I can assume, Cameron, that based on the skill sets in the individual markets, you have some people who are good at this and some people who ain't. Am I right? I mean, it's not across the board the same. I mean,
I'm not going to rag on Gladys, to E&P. But
well, Gladys works for the E&P, not for you. I mean, Francis, similar story. I mean, do you have any champions who really get it, and other markets that have to be educated and brought up to speed?
Yeah, because we're operating in different states, there are different regulations that we have to abide by. And what we found when Jake came to us and started talking to us about Column and the solution that he was building, there was a lot of discussions around, okay, what does this mean? And we have seen a change in public notice interest for quite some time now. And obviously at state legislatures, we've seen it. We've also seen it from other businesses that have looked at that as a new line of revenue for them. And what Jake brought to the table that I found of tremendous interest is not only is he passionate about local journalism and supporting that, but he has identified a segment of our business that, quite frankly, has been incredibly antiquated. We've been very unwilling to change our model. We've been very unwilling to consider more effective and efficient ways of serving the customer. And it gets back to what I think is a much bigger cultural hurdle for our industry, which is our willingness to adopt to change and to transform throughout this digital revolution. And Jake has brought to the table a solution that not only does that, but it epitomizes the need and our willingness to adopt to digital in a new era. And his team has just been phenomenal to work with. There's been some learning hurdles on our end along the way, but technologically, they're so adept of how to utilize a system and integrate it into legacy systems that it has been very eye-opening to us of just how quickly an operation can advance when you have the right partner. And so when it comes down to it, Jake not only has the fabric of a family newspaper company and his commitment to journalism, but he's come to the table with a solution in an area that's desperately needed.
All right, Jake. So you just had your praises sung there. Are you blushing, sir? Let's put you on camera. Jake, there's an old expression, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change in the first place. So Jake, you've been now parading around the industry for 2 years, screaming, you've spoken at conferences, you've called, you had your father, I'm sure, call friends and buddies. You've talked to people you knew. I understand you even had someone introduce you to Dave Chevron at the Media Alliance in Washington, DC. Are you finding this industry tough to change and to grow up and to see a need to move forward?
Well, so first of all, I sent David Chevron a cold email and said, hi, I think at the time was maybe 19 and working in Washington, DC at a different startup company, and said, my family's been in this business for generations. We've been struggling with the digital transition. I'm looking for opportunities to have an impact here. Where do you see a role for me? And he and others that I talked to pointed to public notice as this place where the industry was really in need of someone to kind of take a stand and drive for innovation. And that, to me, like I said, was just something that I immediately fell in love with. And really thought that I had an opportunity as someone with this background in the industry, but also the technical experience and the entrepreneurial experience to actually stand up a company and build the technology and start to roll it out with people to really make a difference. So I think, yeah, I've been to a lot of conferences, given a lot of talks, met a ton of publishers. And I think one thing that I've tried to encourage people and have learned a lot about during that time is the importance of focusing on like customer experience and the way that folks like governments and law firms and private businesses that are required by law to place these notices interact with those newspapers and think about those interactions. And so we kind of view ourselves as this technological muscle that can give publishers the tools they need to provide that great experience. And that's been, I think that has been, just getting the light bulb to want to change, right? Is showing the value that comes from really focusing on improving the customer experience here.
Well, first of all, congratulations, because you still have ink in your veins. And one of the reasons one of the reasons we know that many families have sold out is because the next generations don't see the value in it. They don't try to correlate what's happening in the future with the legacy of the past. You seem to be bridging that very well. All right, you're digitally savvy. You went to Harvard. You studied computer science. By the way, I have a test for anyone who goes to Harvard. Didn't go there, went to GW, but my brother taught there. And I've been visited Brookline many times and we crossed the river together. Jake, what's a smoot? Do you know the answer?
A smoot?
You do not know the Smoot Bridge. We'll talk about that later. And
Okay,
go to Wikipedia. It's one of the bridges, a long story. Okay, let's move on. What about the internet? Correct me if Jake, you're smiling. I know you're going to go to Wikipedia soon and check it out. Talk to me about why this is still a legacy product. Is the internet now being considered by some of these these states, these cities? How are they bridging? How are they growing? And how they want their public notices being advertised to the communities?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit philosophically and then talk a little bit logistically. The philosophical piece gets back to what you just said, which is the value that I see in these businesses and these newspapers and publications that like my family has been in for the past 5 generations, which is they play this role within their community as this hub of information, as the kind of distributors of notifications and stories and the important things that are happening. And that has a tremendous amount of value and is something that's really exciting to think about building on top of. And so philosophically, when you're talking about public notice, it's about having a legal framework for distributing the impactful information about events and decisions and transactions that are happening in these communities out through the channels that exist to reach the constituents there. And so philosophically, I think it's really important to advocate for the role that media plays in being the central node in that distribution of information. And we kind of see ourselves as the technological underpinning of that moving forward. Logistically, most states still have laws that require distribution in print, and there has been legislation introduced pretty consistently to try to change that, but none of them really solve that philosophical piece of how do you effectively leverage the actual channels by which information reach the population in these communities better than the local media. And I don't think that anyone's going to figure out a way to do that anytime soon. So we definitely see that this will continue to be the way that we notify the public for the foreseeable future.
Francis, have you lobbied on behalf of the print industry? Have you gone to your state association? Have you been active in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've lobbied at the state level, not just on public notices, but on other items for access to information, sunshine laws, and obviously we're all aware of the various industry approaches for lobbying that are being taking place in DC right now as well. So,
how about Cameron? Is your family active in making sure that everybody knows how important it is to get that information out in the newspapers in the communities you're in?
Yeah, I think we've been active. And I think the other thing that can't be underestimated is how important the local publishers and the local staff in these communities are, because they connect with the local legislators and they see, the on the ground difference it makes to be able to get this stuff in writing and really distributed. And just going back to something Jake was saying earlier, I really agree that we have, clearly the best distribution mechanisms, and we can improve the distribution mechanisms. And I think there's room there for improvement. We all need to be getting better. And I think that part's really clear. I think the area where we're doing a less good job and where Column is really helping us is in working with the customers that need to get their information out there. So, we're really experts at distribution, but what we're really not expert at, I think, is, customer service, dealing with customers, making it easy for them to get us information, making it easy for them to reach us and work with us. And so for me, Column is really helpful, partially just to look at this issue and bring focus to a category that's really important, but getting us to be more thoughtful about how we communicate with customers and how we let them get in touch with us. Because for a really long time, we made it way too hard. And in way too many areas of our business, we make it way too hard for people to get in touch with us and give us the information and, give us the revenue that we need to do all the other good things. So I think there's good, important focus on the distribution side. And that's definitely where the legal battles are fought. But as businesses, I really want to make sure we do a good job on the customer service and customer experience side. And that's where, I think Column makes a huge difference. So there's, sort of two sides to this coin.
Stephanie, is your company, I guess it's your job, Stephanie, are you constantly talking to those publishers in the local markets and the McClatchy markets and urging them to do a little glad handing, go out, do some, outreach and treat these customers so they think of you first?
I mean, yeah, that is a conversation that we do have with the publishers. I know McClatchy does have a set team that does talk to the local parties in each the markets that we have our newspapers in. The only direct experience I have had is just writing some, very passionate letters on the cause.
All right, so let's talk about Column now. You're rolling it out in different phases at these companies. Cameron, where are you at right now? How many markets have it? How's the rollout going? Do you have Gladys at a desk resenting it because she feels like she's out of a job? I had to ask that question.
Nobody's out of a job. So for us, we're just getting started. We have, and again, it gets a little into the weeds, but we have a few different legacy systems on the back end. And so what we've worked through with Jake is, pilot programs, very focused on a couple of our larger markets, so that, the software can be well integrated, we can get the workflow all figured out. And so we're at that stage where we've got a couple different pilot markets going, each with different back-end systems so that we can make sure each of them works well. And then once that's, all the kinks are worked out and everything's running smoothly, then we do a broader rollout, which is just, sort of our approach in general when we roll out a new product or we bring a new process in, is we want to make sure that it's, working extremely smoothly at one or two locations, and then we'll take it everywhere else. But our intention is to, roll it out everywhere we can.
And no one's presenting it then. No one's saying, hey, you don't get it. We got to, don't change. Keep it the way it was. They're seeing the benefit of the system itself.
I think the most interesting thing, and it gets what I said to you before, is there's a real first instinct to assume that just because we might not like change, that our customers are also not going to like change. And I think what we found is that is just not true. So, our customers are very used to self-serve platforms, being able to get their information in online in all these other aspects of their life. And so, when we assume that, they're going to hate it or there's some sort of huge resistance on their side, it has a lot more to do with, our staff and our feelings about change than it really does with the customers. But very quickly you find out that the customers are more than happy to use this convenient solution. It doesn't take that long.
I got to
Give them a
insert,
couple weeks.
I got to insert a story here, but back in 2002, I think you were very young then. Just about everybody on this, except for me. The first paper I authored with Peter Zollman was a study on the fact that when you do self-serve classifieds, you make more money, because the operator or the person on the phone will always say, well, I can do that in 3 words and 3 lines for $3, but they'll type more content when they're on, they feel more freedom. But it was resented by the people who were on the phones. They didn't like the idea of self-serve. Francis, you have been nodding your head. I have a multiple view of all the monitors here during this conversation. Have you had a Gladys in some of your offices you've had to convince that this is to her benefit?
Yeah, but I would say that's just a cultural nuance of some of the markets that we operate in, and the fact that we've had a lot of autonomy. And so for us, it's really been kind of a focusing a little bit of looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, what kind of company do we want to be? And one of the conversations I want to go back to with Jake early on was the fact that there was this notion of maybe giving up some relationship or feeling like we're not in control of the relationship in the local market. And what that stems from is fear. And if you think about how much we deal with in our transformational progression right now, it's predicated a lot on fear, the fear of the unknown, and knowing what we were and not exactly where we need to be. And so, talking to somebody like Stefani and McClatchy, who have really been open to adopting technology and transitioning their organization much faster than most family businesses have, probably showcases a little bit of the willingness to see how technology can improve what Cameron was talking about, this customer experience. And so we've been very clear that this approach with Column is an approach of us adopting technology and transforming our company and being open to change. Now, have there been hurdles along the way? Absolutely. And we've learned from them, but Kevin and Leo have been dynamic over at Column, and they've helped us each step of the way. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to reallocate some of the time of those CSRs or individuals who are working with the legals to assist in other areas now. And as you know, we've been cutting expense for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And so to be able to reallocate some resources in our operations is very fruitful for us. And I just want to end with this last piece that I think is really interesting and telling to what Cameron was speaking of, which was when we launched this initially in our Montrose, Colorado market. There was definitely some apprehension, and I give the team a lot of credit for being the first one out of the gate. And the feedback from our county treasurer was ecstatic. They were like, finally, we don't have to deal with somebody, we can do it all ourselves. And if you think about it, right, if you think of how challenging we make even the advertising side of our business compared to if you want to put something on Facebook, it's night and day. People go directly to Facebook. They don't necessarily want to go through the 4 and 5 and 6 steps that we have to provide them over and over and over again, even if they love us. Oh, it's great to talk to you. We only have so much time in a day. And Column provides a solution that not only saves time, but is very efficient and effective on the consumer side. And so that's one of the reasons we were excited to go down this path with Jake, and also to support Jake. Our investment in Column is really an investment in Jake and what that looks like. And that's important to us.
All right, so let's bring. Go ahead.
I could just like capture that anecdote about the county treasurer in a bottle. Like that is the product, right? I think we get lumped in as like self-serve for classified ads, but really when I talk about Column, I talk about it being a platform to help publishers manage and enhance their relationships with governments and law firms and the folks that are legally required to place these ads. And that's very different value proposition than self-service advertising.
So let's do it, Jake. This is what it's all about. It's not brain surgery, right? You've simply worked to build a simple interface to allow those neophytes and those that do it every hour of their life, customers that must place public notices, a simple self-service mechanism to do it. And what you, correct me if I'm wrong, that means, let's stop saying Gladys, let's now say Gary, because it could be a guy there, not just Gladys, but that requires Gladys or Gary to say, hey, I got a great idea. Rather than phone it into me, let's try this and send the email link to the platform, correct? Place the platform on the website, Jake, and train them to come to an experience that makes it easier. Do I have that pretty much covered, Jake?
Yeah, generally.
So describe it. What happens when they get here? Right now we're showing what it looks like, the entry system. It's like what, a couple steps, and it actually puts together the ad for the advertiser, correct?
Yeah, and so what we're having, what publishers are doing is getting all of their local law firms and government agencies set up with accounts where they can use to draft and submit these notices to that publication. That's going to walk them through the process of drafting copy that is compliant with state statutes and scheduling it the number of times that it needs to run according to those statutes, and specifying the different addresses that affidavits need to be mailed to. The affidavit process is a whole wonderful can of worms that I'm happy to dig more into. But I think people are often surprised to realize how much. Oh, Stephanie, you're starting to laugh. Do you have some horror stories there that you want to share?
Just like, at the affidavit process and how different it is across every single state. And it's just been, that's the best part, I think, is the affidavit process.
Describe that. Stephanie, what do you mean?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, so basically, whenever you do publish something in the newspaper, you're basically publishing it to get an affidavit to present to the court. And that's your proof that you publish it in the newspaper. And like Jake said, mailing them out, getting them to the customer, that is probably the trickiest part, because even if they're filling something out online and putting in their mailing address, I would say like 8 times out of 10, the customer's like, well, I didn't get it, but also the address I gave you was wrong. So just things like that. It's crazy.
When I was trying to understand how this all worked, I would deliver the ones from my family's papers like by hand. And what I observed was, there's like the law firm across the street that is the one actually placing the notice because they've got a hearing coming up, but then they need the affidavit so that they can then, scan it into their e-filing system and then mail it to the county courthouse. And then you get it to the county courthouse and the clerk there, takes it out of the envelope and stamps it and scans it and then uploads it to their digital file system and then makes 5 copies of it and folds each copy up and puts it in an envelope and writes the name and address of all the different participants of the court case on it and mails all of those copies of the affidavit out. And then fills out an affidavit of mailing, which is another affidavit that says that we did in fact mail that other affidavit, and gets that signed and notarized, and then stamps that and scans it and uploads it to the digital file system. And just like, this is the, we see all that as like an opportunity to continue to add value to this process of how can we go from this point of publication to increasing the value that the public notice system drives for those county clerks, for those law firms that have this, in crazy, oftentimes very bureaucratic and complicated process on either side of the publication step.
Van asks in our chat room to the 3 newspaper groups, if someone phones it in, do you just direct them to Column, or do you still take the order on the phone? Stephanie, let's start with you. What's your policy? Have you trained them to say, go to Column first, or do you take the order and input it yourself?
So it kind of depends. I mean, like you said, sometimes you get a Gladys on the phone and she just refuses to, work online. So if that's the case, we will process it for them. But I would say, since we have done our go live of column in some of our markets, people have definitely been using it. And especially for those one-off notices, like notice to creditors and name changes. I mean, it's just easier for them to log on and do it themselves. And then after it's published, there's a place to automatically upload the affidavit on column. So you don't have to go through all of the journey of mailing it and waiting for it in the mail. So that is a really, a big deal for people who need that right away, just to get it to the clerk as soon as possible.
Cameron, what's your policy? Is it vary market to market?
Yeah. So for us, it's actually pretty straightforward. So what we're doing is we're really letting the customers lead. And so we're seeing an increasing percentage of our customers, opt into using column, use column. We invite everybody to it. But I think the really great thing about Jake and his group is, Jake's fundamentally a newspaper guy. He believes in customer service. And so, you guys know that, what's important to us is that we, don't exclude anybody, that we don't, make this impossible, have overly strict rules, overly strict guidelines. So I think they've been very helpful, helping us be flexible so that we can, enter notices ourselves using the column platform. So, our folks can go in and use the slick little tool and makes our process faster if we're doing it for somebody, or just take a notice the old fashioned way. So it's been nice to have that level of flexibility. And again, it goes back to, at least for Ogden, our goal is really that customer service side. And so that means we have to be a little bit flexible.
Francis, you're still rolling it out market by market. So it must vary, or are you urging your publishers to suggest they go to the platform?
Yeah, so there's, as we're marketing it to the community of users, there's some calibration. And so right now, and there may be some traditional customers that take a little bit more hand-holding. So I think in our Colorado market right now, we're processing about 90% of the revenue through column. 10% is still in-house on it's like a couple specific accounts. And so there is kind of a period of time that things kind of settle out. But I do want to point out that one of the things that's been very interesting aspects of this process has been very interesting to us is the integration of column with our legacy system. So we use vision data, right? And oftentimes what we found is that any changes with legacy systems are a beast. They're very difficult and they take a lot of time. And, Jake and the team over at Column took this head on, and they've worked with us through every iteration. And so I see Katie asked a question about the legal notices being exported, and what Jake and the team have done on their own kind of behest here is they have looped into our legacy system, right? Not requiring a lot of help from the legacy vendor. So what may usually take like a year to get done, we got done in a couple weeks, which I think says a lot of just their technological prowess. And so everything flows into our legacy system, and then the process is just naturally then will be exported to be placed onto our pages or onto our website at that point, which we were doing before we integrated Column. So vision data, we've already solved that issue. And I'm sure they're working on it with some of the other legacy systems, but it's nice to be able to craft the solution on our end rather than having to wait for another party to figure that out.
Jake, what about it? How many legacy systems are you now working with, and are you constantly making sure that you're pliable and easily to integrate?
Yeah, so some of the more common platforms that we've seen publishers use are like Brainworks and Naviga and Vision Data, and so we've worked to make sure that the column system is compatible with for publishers using all of those. All
right, so it's not, you've been working it out and finding, and if a new one comes along, something you're making it happen. How about Stefani? What is it? Is it now totally integrated? Are you able to get them? Is there a publishing system working for you guys over at McClatchy?
So that is still a piece that we are working on. We recently went through a really big system change, and so we're just still trying to get all those pieces to fit together. But that is something that we are currently working with Kevin on and the entire Column team.
All right, so The price. Jake, you're taking a piece of the action, right? You've added a processing fee. This is new? Yes, no? I see you shaking your head.
So we don't take any of publishers' revenue on this. We add a processing fee on top of the publication cost that is ultimately paid by the government agency or the law firm or the private individual that's placing the notice.
Has there been any pushback? That's what Brad wants to know. There's now an additional cost. Has someone, Francis, have you lost business because of this added processing fee?
We've not seen that we've lost any business. And if you just look at your own personal life, if you buy an airline ticket or you rent a car or you buy a ticket on StubHub, it's phenomenal to see all the processing fees that end up going down. And what Jake is really requiring is, quite frankly, nominal for the time that's being saved for the user.
Cameron, you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the convenience factor, the affidavit process, like there's enough value add there. And like Francis said, like this is a very familiar part of, doing any sort of transaction now. And I think it just has become a part of the expectation. And so I think we were outside the norm before, just in the way we handle things in terms of the process and the price structure. And now I don't think that this really shocks anybody. And we've had, limited to no pushback.
Stephanie, I saw you nodding your head. Same over at McClatchy. There's not
For
any.
the most part, the government accounts that do use column, we haven't had any complaints about that, but I really think it's in part because all of the column team members that they work with, they really like working with them. The customer service that they offer, I think, is really something that they appreciate.
What is the processing fee, Jake? That's what Dennis wants to know.
So we charge a fee based on the publication cost, which typically works out to about 10%.
How do you get around the Fannie Mae regulations? Vaughn has that question for foreclosure notices, not having any added fees to the newspaper publication. Has that been an issue, Jake? Are you familiar with that? No?
No, it hasn't been. And our terms of service say that the person placing the notice recognizes that the processing fee is distinct from the publication cost, and that they're agreeing to pay that as a condition of using the software.
As an old sales warhorse, Cameron, I agree with you. When you explain the value, this is just doing good customer service, correct, Cameron?
Yeah, I think it's that straightforward. And again, you're always going to have, a curmudgeon or somebody that is difficult, but I think that this one is, I think it's a pretty easy choice for most of our customers. And if anything, there's much more, like Francis is saying, there's more fear on our side than reality here. And so it just takes a little bit of time to realize that, it's not as scary as we might think.
All right. So, Jay, column is just for public notices. Do you see yourself building to support other categories now? I mean, I'm assuming you're constantly refining the software, but is there other self-serve items that you might want to start tackling as well to try to bring more, bring more business to the industry?
So we're pretty laser focused on public notice as this really unique category that functions very differently than the rest of classified advertisements. We certainly don't want to get into like an arms race of self-serve classified ad software. And so I think have a pretty unique model of building this in partnership with media companies to help them manage these relationships with governments and law firms. And that's just a very different proposition than self-serve classifieds.
Is there any competition out there, Jake? I mean, is there other entities that are grabbing this public notice business from our industry? What is the competition like? Is it out there?
Well, so there are certainly software systems for self-serve classifieds. We don't really see those as competition for what we're doing. We see those kind of as partnership opportunities with companies that we might be able to build a more holistic solution with in the long term. But there, to my knowledge, are no other software companies that are dedicated exclusively to the public notice ecosystem and fully aligned with publishers in the way that we are. So that's our unique little niche that we've carved out for ourselves.
Francis, how are you measuring the value? Francis, how are you measuring the value of this? Dollars and cents, time saved, ease of processing, all of the above? What metrics are you putting behind this?
It's definitely all of the above. And so I think that that question will be better answered. We're just a few months into this as we roll out. We should be concluding the entire company here within the next 4 months. And really the expectation is there will be some time allocation of resources within the operations that we can leverage. But it's as much about the customer experience, and as I shared, it's about the cultural aspect of a company that's looking to transform and not be afraid of technology, but to adopt to it. And again, public notices has been an area that we have had a tremendous amount of fear because of the value of that business line. And Jake and I had this conversation a lot throughout this process, and it ultimately comes down to trust. And I think everyone has to have that feeling of trust and what is it that you're aiming at. And we only have so much time in the environment in which we're operating to what we need to be focusing on. And Column is an assist that we have found to help us in that transformation so that we can be laser focused, as Jake said, on the key aspects of helping us make sure that we can stabilize and sustain journalism in a new model.
Cameron, same question. What metrics are you applying to this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Francis is saying. And I think particularly for us, time saved as we look for ways to make some of our back end administrative type functions more efficient and more consolidated so that we can really focus on allocating resources to the things that, you know, our readers and our subscribers and our advertisers care most about. I think that means that we have to be as efficient as possible with all of our back end. And so that for us is a long-term goal as a company. And this is definitely, you know, a piece of that puzzle, which is really important. I think the other thing that I think we have yet to know how it's going to play out, but I think it's important for us as an industry to make a really good faith effort to make notices as easy as possible to place, as accessible as possible to our readers and to our communities, if we're going to be in a good position to fight this battle on legals that's coming in every state over the next decade. And so I'm hoping that Column can help put us in a good position to fight that fight and show that we're making a really good faith effort to be, you know, good partners. And I know Column's done a lot of work with press associations too on the same thing, but if, you know, that's the big win. Like if at the end of this, we're in a better position to hold the franchise, you know, that's a huge benefit.
Stefani, you are the head of legals for a major media corporation. Do you have to submit reports? What are you asked? What kind of metrics do you have to show the company that you're being successful, and how has Column helped you get there?
So we work with Kevin, which is he's with Column, and we track how many ads are booked each month, and we talk about that at least once a month. And so that's kind of what we base our progress on with Column, is how many ads are being booked per month. And as we've added Column to our other markets, we've noticed that they are using it more and more. So that is basically how we have been tracking it.
Okay, great. Now, there's dialogue going on in the chat room that is fascinating. Jake, you got a troll sitting in there answering these questions, but they're just going to the panelists. And I think some of these questions may have relevance to the entire audience. So let me pose one out there now. One of our participants asked, what if they mistype something? What if they get it wrong? Does Column give you a way to have this checked? How does the internal system work? How do you send it back for final approval? Is it simple? Is it simplified? I mean, how are you making sure everything is legal from start to end, Jake?
Yeah, so the submission interface uses templates that are provided by the newspaper, which and has most of the legal language already set if they're using the interface to craft the notice. Otherwise, if they're uploading their own text, there's an exchange of proofs and confirmation back and forth before it actually gets published, which is generally how it works for the most part at most publishers. We've just automated all of it. So the processes that would have existed to catch those any errors that would happen are similar. We think a little bit faster and more efficient and more accurate in the Column system, where if you're Stefani, you're trying to prevent errors across like hundreds of these notices being submitted per week, per day. Stefani, I don't know, what's the usual volume, and how do you?
As far as like when we pull affidavits and stuff, we have at least 100 to 200 per day across all the markets. So it's massive. It's a massive amount of notices.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, Jake. I'm sorry.
and Mike, I was just gonna say, you had the interface up there that is the kind of one central dashboard. It's a list view of the different notices, the different status that each notice has, where it is in the process, whether it's been confirmed by the customer, whether it's been paid for. I think just having that tracking system that you can filter to which ones haven't been paid for yet or which ones haven't been confirmed by the customers is a pretty good step toward increasing accuracy and reducing error rates, especially on the publisher side.
We had a question about alternative languages, Jake. I never thought of that, especially with different multi-language publications. Public notices, in some cases, have to be distributed that way. How are you handling that right now?
So the question is,
Any solutions for translating was the question in the chat room.
Yeah, so we're getting there. I think it's pretty easy to plug into some of the natural language processing and translation APIs that are coming online from things like Google Cloud Platform to be able to support international publications and publications serving other different language communities. So yeah, something we're actively working on.
All right, so let's discuss now that we're getting near the end of our journey. We got about 9 minutes left. The big news that you said you were going to release to the industry during the the broadcast today, Jake, and I'm assuming it's, I'll tell you something, Jake. I got an actual letter today in the mail because I'm a member of the association. So Jake, why don't you make the announcement? What is the big news that Colin wants to release today?
Yeah, so well, the big news that came out today is that the California Press Association has joined our partner program. We do a lot of work with associations to help them with the technology that they maintain as like a statewide database of public notices to go to the legislature and advocate on behalf of their members. So we, originally started working with the Kansas Press Association on that way back when we were first getting started, and since then have seen the Colin Partner Program grow over 10x in just a couple of years. So we've now got 10 states that have signed on to work with Column on the continued maintenance and development of these statewide sites and starting to adopt some more like data-driven and technology enhanced tactics for advocating for public notice in state legislatures.
This is a completely separate system, though, isn't it? What you're doing with the states, as opposed to the enterprise system you're providing for individual newspapers or newspaper groups, correct?
Yes, totally separate. We have a free product, which is the hosted database of notices that associations have been, we think, spending way too much money on, and is quite easy for us to build given our, the technology that we have built for publishers. So our, the way that we make money is through this enterprise product that is being used by a larger and larger portion of the kind of enterprise publishing market each month, but our kind of volunteer mission-oriented work has been with associations like California and Kansas and Colorado and Idaho and Arizona and New Mexico and Maryland that have signed on to our Colin Partner Program.
What's the benefit? What is the final? Let's assume that you centralize the system through the states as well. What is this in order to help the industry maintain the business, or as Cameron said, stop the floodgates of it going away, just to make it a simpler process for those that place the ads? Jake?
So there's a couple of benefits. One is, like I said, trying to introduce some better technology in the work that associations do in state legislatures, where let's say that you've got a bill that wants to remove a requirement of one particular type of notice, which represents millions of dollars in revenue for the publishers in your state. Being able to show up to those hearings and have data-driven insights of here's how many of that type of notice were placed, here's the average price, here's the standard deviation from the mean of how much it usually costs the government to do this over time, and like how that's changed over the last 5 years, is really important information that hasn't been introduced into these conversations until now. And so that's kind of how we view the opportunity to help the public policy conversation that's happening. The second is through some of the work that we've done with associations like Idaho, who have had bills introduced to totally remove notices from newspapers altogether, and giving them the opportunity to go into those legislative hearings and say, we have adopted this new platform that's going to modernize this system for every community in Idaho, and work with us to design a new solution here that meets the requirements from a public policy perspective of the state government, is, we think, a really compelling narrative for association advocate and industry advocates to enter those conversations with, and be able to be the drivers of innovation and the drivers of the forward momentum in this conversation in those state legislatures. So providing, the analytics and technology at a, kind of micro argumentation level, but then also at a higher level, helping those folks drive innovation.
All right. Dennis was concerned. He got the same press release I got from the California Press Association, said it was kind of vague. The end game is, Dennis was asking in our chat room, do I have to go through the state association when they partner with you, or can I still deal direct with my customers through Column? And of course, your team answered it before we got there. The answer is, Jake, right. Yeah, you still can have your own relationships locally. It's not like you're giving it up to the state association, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Final thoughts. Francis, you've got the forum. You've got lots of news publishing executives watching right now. If you were to give them some advice about the future of this industry, where it's heading, especially when it comes to taking public notices, what advice do you give the other publishers and executives that are watching this today?
Yeah, I think the big thing is taking the time to have conversations with people like Jake and understand what the focus and purpose is and how they're trying to assist. We all recognize that things are changing very quickly, and we've looked at this as an aspect to assist us in that transformation so that we can be focused on areas that are key to our strategic plan. Public notices are changing, and that's the other piece of this. The public notices are going to change. If we think that they're not, we're being naive. And so Jake has really spoken eloquently to some of the data points and ways to help not only state associations, but our newspaper companies, and how to be very clear and direct with lawmakers of the value that we bring as a third party, independent party of oversight and publishing to offer this information. So that's what I would leave with. I think, again, Jake and his team are exceptional. We've really we've learned a lot from them and what we can do as an industry. And I applaud his efforts here very much. And, we all want to root for younger people who want to make an impact in this industry and add good positive value to what we're doing.
Ms. 25 under 34, speaking of younger people.
Get loud.
Your thoughts to the industry, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that this has really taught me or reminded me of that's helpful, in all sorts of projects that we're doing, is that what we need to remember to do is to be focused on what's our mission and what's our purpose as organizations, and not as attached to what's our process or how did we used to do it. So this is a really good example for us. Like, Colin's helping us achieve the mission that's always been there, always been what we're trying to do to, make information transparent for our communities and, deliver useful information. And if we have to change our process to achieve the mission better, like that's good. And we should embrace that. And I think that we get in trouble when we are so attached to process and we lose sight of why we're doing it. So, this is just sort of one example, but I think there are a lot of different areas in our business where we could be doing that better.
Stefani, your single mission is public notices, and you're young. Where do you see this going, and what advice do you give an industry that's watching you right now?
Well, I definitely think that the key is to just continue to be willing to evolve, especially as things like Column and online publications continue to change and laws continue to change. You just have to be willing to, as a company, make those changes as well.
All right, great. Jake, final thoughts. We know that you're offering a page right now. If people want to request a demo, they can schedule a date and a time at info.column.us/demo. Jake, your final thoughts to the audience.
Yeah, this has just been so much fun. Like, there's nothing better than getting to wake up every day and work on trying to solve a problem in the business that my family's been involved with for 5 generations, using like all the skills that I learned in college and working on the first startup company that I worked on with, and getting the team from that back together to build a second company together at Column. That's all been so fun. And now we're kind of at this point where it's working. The use of our platform has been growing kind of 30% or so, compounding monthly, which has been really exciting to see. And we've got 10 state associations on board with our partner program. So I think we've gone from a fun idea and an interesting experiment happening in a couple of states to something that's really being actively rolled out across a big chunk of the industry. And that's been really exciting. And I think we've got a fun couple of years ahead as we continue to work with folks like Stefani and Cameron and Francis to really try to make a difference here. It's just been so fun to get to work, get to know these folks, and get to work with them. So yeah, thanks, Mike, for putting this together.
info.column.us/demo. Learn more there. Jake, what is your email address? I think it's simple, right?
Yeah, it's just my last name at Seaton at column.us.
Francis, thank you for your valuable time, sir. Cameron, always a pleasure. And Stephanie, it was great to meet you. Stand-up comedian who's also in charge of legals for a major media company. That's quite a story. We really appreciate your time as well. And thanks for everyone for participating. Have a great day and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.